expected to see, and frankly, in the last century, we never saw. In this century, we never saw. And as I made note of the fact, last time Americans stood up against each other was the Civil War, and of course, President Lincoln, of whom we all admire with affection for his duty to this nation and his patriotism, really spoke to the heart of that and said a nation divided against itself, or at least his words connoted that. A nation divided against itself cannot stand. And I want us to be united. I want us to have the freedom to express our opposition and disagreement. But what Donald Trump generated was a violation of his duty, was an abuse of power, was clearly, I think, it calls out for accountability. It calls out for accountability. I'm sad to say that, but it calls out for accountability. And I can't tell, George, has he taken, and I'm asking him, please come to the public microphone and to give comfort to his supporters and ask them to stand down, ask them to protest peacefully and to cease the attack against the United States Capitol, the capital of the United States of America.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your time today. We hope you stay safe as well. I want to bring in Mary Bruce. Mary, you've gotten some new pictures of what was happening inside, I guess, the Speaker's office?
Yeah, George, a remarkable image here that I think is one that just encapsulates this day, and something that I think, we will remember this day for. There, one of these protesters, one of these anarchists who have stormed the Capitol, sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk. That is the desk of the House Speaker. That appears to be her ceremonial office. You see this man there sitting casually, his feet disrespectfully on her desk, on a folder of hers. There have been, of course, reports of looting and vandalism throughout the halls of the Capitol, throughout other offices as well. But, of course, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been a frequent target of President Trump's. He has taken her on, sort of tried to villainize her in some ways. She and the president have certainly gone head-to-head in many times in the past. But this image, I think, is just one that I think will be seared in the minds of many Americans going forward. This Trump supporter sitting at the House Speaker's desk, his boot on her desk, George.
How did they get that far? How did they get in the Capitol? How were they able to take over? Those are questions that are going to have to be answered in the coming days. Mary Bruce, thanks very much. I want to bring in Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana. Senator, I assume you're safe right now. What can you tell us about what's going to be happening next for you and your fellow senators in this debate?
We're sheltering in place, and so obviously they have to clear the Capitol. But I will echo what Congresswoman Lee said. We must complete this process. This is an attempt to disrupt a constitutionally ordered process. It's what happens in third world countries. It should not be happening in the United States of America. And so as soon as this Capitol is cleared, it would be my vote to go back in that chamber and finish this process.
That is, I guess, everyone's hope at this point. What responsibility, as you just heard, Congresswoman Lee, I know you were listening, does the president bear for how these protesters have acted today?
Say that one more time. I didn't quite understand how your question was phrased.
What responsibility does the president bear for these protests today, for these actions taking over the Capitol?
Clearly, these people are angry that the president lost. The president can speak to them like no other. I tweeted out a message asking that the president would speak to them without any sort of equivocation, that they need to stand down, that this is what, again, happens in third world countries, not in the United States of America. This is criminal activity, and that it discredits anything that the president would hope to stand for. And the president needs to do that on television. He needs to do it without equivocation and without any sort of kind of, what would you say, codicil or any sort of thing that would otherwise moderate that explicit stand down.
Well, and is that what we saw earlier in that 1-minute videotape message where he called on them to stand down but told the supporters he loved them and that the election was indeed stolen?
So I don't think we should be speaking about stolen elections. I think we should be speaking about how we should not be rioting in the United States Capitol, and this is an assault upon our democracy.
When do you expect to get back to work?
I don't know that, George. Right now it's still fluid. I'm watching on television and see all the police lights, and so we shall see. But as far as I'm concerned, we stay here until we do this. It is our constitutional responsibility.
Senator Cassidy, stay safe. Thanks for joining us this evening. Want to bring in Cecilia Vega. Cecilia, one of the things we saw, and I was talking to Chris Christie about this in our last hour, the contrast in the president's statement to his supporters and what we heard from him this summer in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not going lost on so much of the American public, and I would venture to say particularly black and brown people in our country. Those images that we all lived through over the summer of black and brown protesters, as many people said, protesting peacefully, met with resistance, met with armed authorities, flashbangs that we saw that we're not seeing today, that we didn't see flashbangs until fairly recently in this protest, and that's not lost on the American public and people of color in our country who are wondering why is this discrepancy in how justice is being carried out today, and whether this is in fact justice being carried out, and if this is equal justice in what we're seeing here.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. I want to bring in John Santucci, one of our White House producers. John, what are you learning from inside the White House right now?
Inside the White House, George, it's relatively quiet. It's calm. I'm told the president has been bouncing between the Oval and his private dining room, which is just off from the Oval Office, watching coverage today. There's been a small number of aides that have seen the president in person. They include Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, and Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter and senior advisor. They had been lobbying him all day to get out and do something. That was, of course, that video message that we saw he released earlier on Twitter. But, George, the White House has been getting calls, from my understanding, all afternoon from members up on Capitol Hill. The president not taking many of those calls, but his staffers, the few that remain, are. All of them saying the same thing, George. He needs to get out there, needs to do more. Even after that Twitter video message, which some said was at least something, they still believe, those callers, needs more to be done. As far as the building itself, we've been reporting on this, George, as you know, for the last several weeks. The number of people physically in the building has decreased. It's people that have slowly left, slowly transitioned out. I am told that many people did not physically go to work today because they were fearful of two things. One, the violence that they expected to break out, which obviously we've been covering all day, but also the rage of the president, who has been railing against the vice president and many others in his senior staff over the last several days. The other part, too, George, that we need to remember, and a source pointed this out to me as well, is that the beginning of this week, it started the new year, started the new Congress. It also started the transition. There are staffers in the White House that have already begun the offboarding process. They are slowly turning over their government phones and computers because come January 20th, George, as you know, they're not going to be government employees.
John, you may not be able to answer this, but you know the president well. You've covered him closely for the last 5 years plus. Do you have any sense that any of this is seeping in, that he understands what has happened, that he understands he needs to do more?
George, and it's a little close to 6 years, as we know, to be honest. But as what one person said to me, which spoke volumes, and this is from a person that I've known since the beginning, the president is still in the denial phase of the grief process. He has not accepted the fact he has lost. He cannot understand it. He cannot fathom it, and thus cannot move forward. There are people, George, that around him are trying to make the necessary preparations for what happens next. He's got to go somewhere. Does he go down to Mar-a-Lago? Do they do some type of an event to thank staff? How does he leave the White House? Does he greet President-elect Joe Biden on January 20th? Two people said to me just days ago that no one can approach him about the January 20th what do we do conversation. He's just not there yet.
Well, that's just crazy. Okay, John Santucci, thanks very much. I want to go back to Martha Raddatz there near the Capitol. They're starting to move people away.
They're starting to move some people away, George, but behind me are a line of people. That you can see the police officers there. They've been putting some of the rioters into police vehicles. You can see a lot of them handcuffed. There have been several of them that they've put into vehicles. We haven't seen them yet on this side move towards the Capitol, but there's been a lot of movement from the police. We also saw, we keep moving back,